Ambassador Calthrix stood at the window of his temporary embassy, watching the bustling streets of New Geneva. Only 3 weeks had passed since his ship descended through Earth's atmosphere. Yet humans moved about their daily business, as if interstellar visitors had always been part of their world. This adaptability disturbed him deeply. "The integration specialist team has arrived, Ambassador," announced his aide, a tall Medusan whose translucent skin pulsed with biochemical communication patterns. "They're rather confused." Calthrix nodded. Integration specialists typically spent decades helping primitive species adjust to galactic reality. For most newly contacted worlds, the revelation of extraterrestrial life triggered religious upheaval, governmental collapse, or cultural paralysis. The specialists came prepared with psychological intervention protocols and societal stabilization techniques. They weren't prepared for humans asking pointed questions about faster-than-light propulsion mechanics. "Send them in," Calthrix said, straightening his ceremonial mantle. 5 specialists entered, their expressions ranging from professional concern to outright bewilderment. Chief Specialist Noor Taverin, a respected xenopsychologist with 3 centuries of experience, appeared particularly troubled. "Ambassador, with all due respect, we don't understand why we're here," Taverin began. "These humans should be experiencing collective existential crisis. Instead, they've established a unified diplomatic corps and submitted formal applications to 17 different Imperial technology exchange programs. That concerns the Science Council as well," Calthrix replied. "Particularly their request for access to gravitonic engineering databases." Taverin's facial tentacles contorted in alarm. "But that's centuries beyond their developmental stage. Most species require multiple generations to conceptually grasp trans-dimensional physics." Outside the window, a crowd had gathered around a public information screen where a human physicist enthusiastically explained warp field theory to her fellow humans, using analogies and simplified diagrams provided by the Imperial information packet. The crowd nodded along, asking questions that demonstrated fundamental comprehension of concepts the Empire expected would confuse them for decades. "Their neural architecture processes new information differently than any catalogued species," Calthrix said quietly. "The Science Council's preliminary assessment suggests they don't just learn. They intuitively grasp fundamental principles and extrapolate applications we haven't considered." "Is the Council considering quarantine protocol?" asked a junior specialist. Calthrix didn't answer immediately. The Empire had only invoked quarantine protocol 3 times in its 12,000-year history, each time against species whose advancement threatened galactic stability. Never had they considered it for a pre-spaceflight civilization. "The Council is divided," he finally admitted. "Some believe humans represent an unprecedented opportunity for the Empire. Others see them as potentially destabilizing. My mission is to determine which assessment is correct." His communicator chimed with an urgent alert. The human delegation had arrived early for their scheduled meeting. Another breach of expected protocol. Newly contacted species typically required extensive preparation before formal diplomatic sessions. "They're advancing the meeting schedule again," Calthrix told his team. "They've already drafted a preliminary cultural exchange proposal that would normally take a species 5 years to develop." As Calthrix prepared to meet the humans, he composed his thoughts for his evening report to the Imperial Council. He would need to choose his words carefully. How could he explain that this unassuming planet might harbor the most significant development in galactic politics since the founding of the Empire itself? And how could he convey his growing certainty that humanity's potential had only begun to reveal itself? The implications were simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. These humans, still using combustion engines and silicon-based computing, might soon walk among the stars as equals to species with millennia of advancement beyond them. The question that haunted Calthrix wasn't if humans would transform the galaxy. Dr. Ileana Chen adjusted the microscope's calibration as she studied the cellular sample taken from Martian colonist Maya Hernandez. The laboratory orbiting Jupiter hummed with activity as her team worked frantically to document the unprecedented changes occurring in human settlers across the solar system and beyond. "This shouldn't be possible," Dr. Chen muttered, gesturing for her colleague Dr. Sanjay Patel to observe. Maya spent only 6 months on the Proxima Centauri colony, but her cellular structure has already developed enhanced radiation processing. Her cells aren't just resistant to radiation, they're metabolizing it. Dr. Patel leaned over the microscope with skepticism that quickly transformed into astonishment. The mitochondrial structures have completely reconfigured. It's as if her cells evolved a specialized organelle specifically designed for that environment. "And it's happening everywhere," Dr. Chen said, bringing up holographic displays showing data from 7 different colonies. Humans on Epsilon Eridani have developed enhanced visual processing for low-light environments. Those on the Tav City mining outpost show increased bone density and muscle efficiency in higher gravity. The laboratory door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a tall, gray-skinned figure wearing what appeared to be standard medical scrubs. Dr. Chen recognized the facial structure as Silurian, though something about the visitor's movements seemed slightly off. "Dr. Remar," she greeted the newcomer, who had joined their team the previous month as part of the Imperial Scientific Exchange. "Would you like to examine these adaptations yourself?" Agent Frixnar, disguised as the Silurian physician, nodded stiffly. For 3 weeks, he had been gathering intelligence on human biological developments for Imperial intelligence. Each report he sent back caused greater alarm within the Empire's highest circles. "I'm particularly interested in your hypothesis regarding these adaptations," he said carefully. "Your preliminary report suggested they might be spontaneous evolutionary responses rather than environmental damage." Dr. Chen nodded enthusiastically. "That's precisely what makes this so remarkable. Most species suffer degradation when exposed to alien environments, cellular breakdown, cancer, systemic failure. Humans instead adapt and incorporate beneficial traits. It's as if our DNA contains dormant instructions for surviving almost anywhere." A commotion from the adjacent laboratory interrupted their conversation. A young researcher stumbled through the doorway, clutching his arm. A chemical burn was rapidly spreading across his exposed skin, the result of a containment breach. "Medical emergency," Dr. Patel shouted, rushing toward the emergency shower station. Before anyone could reach him, the injured researcher gasped in pain as the affected skin began to blister. Then, before the astonished eyes of everyone present, the blistering stopped. The angry red coloration began to fade, replaced by new pink skin that spread across the wound. "It's accelerating," Dr. Chen whispered, scanning the researcher with a medical tricorder. "The adaptation process is happening within minutes now, not months." Vrixnar watched in carefully concealed horror. The Empire had classified thousands of sentient species, documented millions of evolutionary patterns across the galaxy. Nothing, absolutely nothing, behaved like this. That night, encrypting his transmission to Imperial intelligence from his private quarters, Vrixnar abandoned diplomatic caution. Humans represent an evolutionary paradigm without precedent. Their genetic code contains adaptation mechanisms that activate in response to any environmental challenge. Most concerning is the acceleration curve. What once took generations now occurs within months, sometimes days. If current trends continue, we cannot predict what humans will become within a decade. He paused before adding the classification that would send tremors through the Imperial hierarchy. Recommend immediate upgrade to Threat Category Alpha. These beings are not merely evolving. They are transforming into something beyond our comprehension. Admiral Marcus Wright stood alone on the observation deck of the Imperial flagship Eternal Vigilance, watching the stars blur past as the massive vessel cut through hyperspace. 7 years ago, he had been a lieutenant commander in Earth's fledgling Space Force. Now he commanded the 3rd Imperial Fleet, the first human to hold such authority in the Galactic Empire's 12,000-year history. "Admiral," came a soft voice from behind him. "May I speak with you?" Privately. Wright turned to see his first officer, Commander Plex, a Centaurian whose crystalline exoskeleton glimmered under the dim light. Wright had come to trust the alien officer implicitly over their 3 years of service together. Computer, Privacy Protocol Alpha, Wright said. The observation deck's ambient lighting shifted to red, indicating all recording devices had been deactivated. What's troubling you, Commander? Plex's 4 hands performed a nervous gesture Wright had never seen from the typically composed officer. I have violated several Imperial security protocols by coming to you with this information, the Centaurian began. But my oath to serve my commanding officer supersedes even Imperial security directives. Wright's expression remained neutral, but he felt a chill run down his spine. Go on. The Imperial Security Council has implemented a classified initiative called the Pandora Protocol. Plex continued, voice barely above a whisper despite the privacy measures. It authorizes surveillance and potential containment measures against all human populations throughout Imperial space. This fleet, your fleet, has been placed on a readiness schedule for possible deployment against human settlements. Wright didn't immediately respond, his enhanced mind. Another unexpected gift of humanity's rapid evolution, processing implications at remarkable speed. The Empire feared them enough to plan military action while simultaneously promoting humans to positions of authority, a containment strategy with a fatal flaw. How did you access this information? Wright finally asked. My tertiary cousin serves on the Emperor's Guard detail, Plex replied. Even the Emperor's personal guard is being briefed on human containment scenarios. Admiral, some within the Imperial hierarchy are calling for preemptive strikes against major human population centers. Wright moved to the observatory's comm system. Recall the senior staff for emergency briefing. Admiral. Plex's voice held genuine concern. What will you do? Something unexpected, Wright answered. The Empire expects either ignorance or rebellion from us. I choose a third option. 48 hours later, Admiral Wright stood before the Imperial Council on Galactic Central, the Empire's throne world. The council members, representatives of the 12 founding species, watched him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Admiral Wright, Emperor Xolan VI addressed him from the central dais. Your request for this unprecedented audience is granted. What matter demands our immediate attention? Wright stepped forward. Your Imperial Majesty, Honorable Council, I come before you with knowledge of the Pandora Protocol. A ripple of shock passed through the chamber. Grand Archon Zex Torer rose to his feet. This human has accessed classified Imperial security protocols. Guards, remove him immediately. I come not in anger. Wright continued calmly as Imperial guards hesitated, uncertain whether to seize a decorated fleet admiral, but with a proposal. Humanity acknowledges your concerns about our rapid development. We offer complete transparency, unrestricted access to our research, our colonies, our evolutionary data, in exchange for equal representation within Imperial governance. You demand equality with species that have been part of this empire for millennia, sneered Councillor Drax from the Regelian hegemony. We propose partnership, Wright corrected, rather than subjugation or conflict. The Empire needs humanity's adaptability, as much as we need the Empire's stability. Before the Emperor could respond, a series of explosions rocked the chamber. The security barriers shimmered and failed as smoke filled the room. Through the chaos, Wright saw a squad of armored figures entering through the breached doors, separatist terrorists who had plagued the Empire for decades. Without hesitation, Wright launched himself toward Emperor Xolan as the throne dais erupted in flames. Captain Sophia Reyes stood on the observation platform of New Titan Colony, her eyes fixed on the solar monitors displaying the approaching radiation storm. The massive gas giant's orbital station housed 50,000 colonists, a mixture of humans and 17 alien species working to harvest the rare atmospheric compounds found only in this system. Evacuation status, she asked her executive officer, Lieutenant Kali Nayar. 70% complete, Captain, Nayar replied, checking her datavad. But the storm's acceleration has increased. Imperial meteorological models predict impact in 17 minutes, not the 30 we planned for. Reyes closed her eyes, focusing on the strange new awareness that had been developing within her mind over the past year. Like thousands of other humans throughout the galaxy, she had begun experiencing abilities that defied conventional explanation. For her, it manifested as a form of expanded perception, a sixth sense that allowed her to feel energy patterns across vast distances. She could sense the solar storm now, a roiling mass of charged particles racing toward them, more powerful than the instruments had detected. Worse, she could somehow perceive a secondary wave building behind it that the colony sensors hadn't registered. "The models are wrong," she said, opening her eyes. "We have less than 10 minutes, and there's a second wave coming. We need to reroute the evacuation transports to the far side of the moon. They won't clear the radiation front otherwise." The Imperial Station Commander, a Tholian named Sindrak, mandated strict adherence to Imperial evacuation protocols. "Captain Reyes, with all due respect, the Empire's predictive models are built on 12,000 years of solar physics. We cannot deviate from established procedures based on your intuition." Reyes looked directly at him. "Commander, you've served with me for 3 years. When have I been wrong about these things?" The Tholian's faceted eyes studied her for a long moment. Throughout Imperial space, stories were spreading of humans demonstrating inexplicable abilities, prescience, telekinesis, impossible feats of mental computation. Many dismissed these as exaggerations or propaganda. Others, particularly those who worked closely with humans, knew better. "Redirect the evacuation transports," Sindrak ordered his staff, then turned back to Reyes. "What else do we need to do?" "The station's shielding won't hold against the secondary wave," she said. "We need to boost power to the dorsal deflectors and evacuate the lower habitation rings completely." As the station crew scrambled to implement her recommendations, Reyes felt a painful pressure building behind her eyes. The abilities came with costs, neurological strain that human physiology was still adapting to handle. She gripped the railing as her vision blurred momentarily. "Captain," Nayar asked with concern. "I'm all right," Reyes assured her, though the pressure was intensifying. "But there's something else." Without warning, a critical power coupling in the shield generator overloaded, sending cascading failures through the station's defensive systems. Alarms blared as the main deflector shield began to collapse, exactly as the first wave of the solar storm reached them. Reyes felt something shift inside her mind. Acting on instinct, she raised her hands toward the main view screen showing the approaching radiation front. The pressure behind her eyes erupted into blinding pain as she somehow reached into the energy patterns swarming around the station. The entire command crew froze in astonishment as the radiation storm visibly bent around the station, diverted by an invisible force that sensors couldn't explain. The main view screen showed streams of charged particles flowing around New Titan like water around a rock. "Captain," Nayar whispered, "are you doing that?" Reyes couldn't answer, her entire concentration focused on maintaining whatever connection she had formed with the energy surrounding them. Blood trickled from her nose as sweat beaded on her forehead. When the storm finally passed, and the immediate danger was over, Reyes collapsed to the deck. As medical teams rushed to her side, Commander Sindrak stared at the station's readings in disbelief. "Impossible," he murmured. She manipulated a Class 5 solar storm through sheer will. The Tholian commander looked down at the unconscious human, understanding washing over him. "The rumors are true. They're becoming something more." Within hours, recordings of the incident spread across Imperial communications networks despite security protocols. Trillions of Imperial citizens watched as a human woman altered the path of a stellar event through what could only be described as an act of godlike power. Professor Jaquel Ta ran his six-fingered hand over the ancient stone wall, tracing glyphs that had remained undisturbed for 50,000 years. The dead world of Kronos had once been the center of a vast civilization that predated the Empire by millennia. Now it served as both graveyard and mourning. "Magnify this section," he instructed his research assistant, a young Arcturian named Lith. The holographic imager hummed as it enhanced the detail of the central pictograph. A humanoid figure surrounded by radiating lines, its arms outstretched as if manipulating the environment around it. "The similarity is undeniable," Tom murmured. "Compare this ancient imagery with the footage from New Titan." Lith activated a second hologram showing Captain Rice diverting the solar storm. The parallels between the 50,000-year-old carving and the recent event were chilling. "The ancient text refers to them as the Shapers," Ta said, consulting his translation algorithm. "Beings who could mold reality through thought alone. The precursor civilization believed these entities destroyed their empire." "But Professor," Lith objected, "these carvings predate humanity's evolution on Earth by tens of thousands of years. How could they possibly be referencing humans?" Tao's expression darkened. Perhaps they weren't predicting humans specifically, but a pattern, an evolutionary path that repeats itself across cosmic time. "The warnings are spread across 27 worlds in this sector. Each describes the same phenomenon. Beings who evolve beyond normal limitations and ascend to godlike status." His communication device chimed urgently. "Professor Ta," came the voice of the Imperial Archaeological Council's director, "your presence is required immediately on Galactic Central. The Emperor has convened an emergency session based on your preliminary findings." Across the galaxy, in a research facility orbiting Earth's moon, Dr. Thomas Zhang floated weightlessly in a meditation chamber, surrounded by 12 other humans with advanced cognitive abilities. Their minds had evolved beyond normal human parameters, allowing them to perceive aspects of reality invisible to others. "Focus on the nexus point," Zhang instructed the group. "Don't try to analyze it, just feel the connections." Together, their consciousnesses brushed against what they had named the substrate, a dimension that seemed to underlie physical reality, connecting all points in space-time. Within this realm, thought and energy were interchangeable, allowing those who could access it to affect the physical world in ways that appeared miraculous to observers. "I can sense the Imperial fleet movements," whispered Dr. Elena Diaz, one of the participants. "They're mobilizing along the Orion Arm. 17 capital ships redirected toward Earth." Zhang nodded grimly. The Imperial Council had authorized a containment fleet, the first step toward potential military action against humanity. Tensions had escalated rapidly since Captain Ray's display of power on New Titan and the subsequent emergence of similar abilities among humans throughout Imperial space. "They fear what they don't understand," Zhang said, "but we can't allow them to threaten our homeworld." The 12 linked minds extended their awareness through the substrate, reaching across hundreds of light years to the approaching Imperial army. They didn't seek to harm, merely to demonstrate that conventional forces could not contain humanity's evolution. Admiral Vorkaz of the Imperial Security Force stood on the bridge of his flagship, preparing to leave the containment fleet to the Sol system, when every system on the massive dreadnought simultaneously deactivated. Weapons, propulsion, life support, all shut down in perfect synchronization. "Emergency protocols," he shouted, but the backup systems remained unresponsive. Around his vessel, 16 other capital ships drifted powerless in the void. On each ship's main view screen, a simple message appeared in Imperial Standard. "We seek peace, not conflict. Your weapons cannot contain what we are becoming. Let us talk instead of what we might achieve together." Throughout Imperial space, billions watched in horror or awe as the Empire's most powerful fleet hung helpless in space, disabled by human minds operating across impossible distances. The Grand Assembly Hall in New Geneva hummed with tension as representatives from all human settlements gathered for the unprecedented conclave of direction. The cavernous space, built specifically for this historic meeting, featured architecture that blended Earth traditions with advanced Imperial design concepts, a physical manifestation of humanity's rapid evolution. Dr. Maya Hernandez, her cellular structure still visibly altered from her time on Proxima Centauri, addressed the assembly from the central podium. "The harmonist position is clear," she stated, her voice amplified throughout the hall. "Our abilities emerged for a reason. We have evolved to become bridges between species, not to separate ourselves from the galactic community. Cooperation offers greater benefits than isolation." Murmurs rippled through the gathered delegates as Hernandez stepped down. She represented the faction advocating for continued integration with the Empire, albeit as equals rather than subjects. Marcus Chen, leader of the Sovereignist movement, took her place. His imposing presence, enhanced by subtle genetic adaptations from his years on a high-gravity mining colony, commanded immediate attention. The Empire had 12,000 years to evolve beyond their limitations. Chen's deep voice resonated through the hall. They stagnated instead, becoming complacent in their supposed superiority. Now they fear us because we represent what they failed to become. He paused, scanning the audience. Humanity's destiny lies beyond imperial constraints. We must establish independent colonies where our potential can develop unfettered. The third faction's representative approached the podium with an otherworldly grace. Dr. Thomas Zhang seemed to shimmer slightly, his physical form appearing somehow less substantial than those around him, a side effect of his extensive work within the substrate. "Both previous speakers frame our future in conventional terms," Zhang began, his voice surprisingly melodic. "The Transcendents believe we're witnessing not just another evolutionary step, but a transformation of consciousness itself. Our physical forms are merely vessels for something greater emerging. The substrate offers a path beyond material existence entirely." As Zhang described experiences within the non-physical dimension that advanced humans could access, many delegates shifted uncomfortably. The transcendent philosophy suggested humanity might eventually abandon physical form completely, an idea too radical for many to embrace. The debate continued for hours, passionate and occasionally heated. No consensus emerged. Instead, the conclave established a framework allowing individual humans to align with whichever philosophical approach resonated with them, while maintaining diplomatic coordination through a joint council. General Sophia Reyes, watching from a private observation booth, sighed heavily. As commander of the newly formed Human Defense Force, she understood better than most the dangers of disunity. "This fragmentation concerns you," noted Admiral Wright, seated beside her. "Division makes us vulnerable," Reyes replied. "The Empire is watching for weakness." Wright nodded thoughtfully. "Yet it also demonstrates something important about human nature. Even as we evolve beyond our physical limitations, we retain our diversity of thought. Perhaps that's our greatest strength. Or our fatal flaw," Rice countered. Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent communication. Lieutenant Nayar's holographic image appeared before them, her expression grave. "General, we're detecting massive energy signatures approaching from beyond the Oort cloud. They match no known imperial design." Rice exchanged a glance with Wright. "Unknown vessels." "Not vessels, General," Nayar clarified, her voice tight with tension. "The energy patterns suggest entities, massive consciousness constructs moving through space without physical containment." As Reyes absorbed this information, ancient warning beacons, relics from civilizations that predated the Empire, began activating across multiple star systems. These automated sentinels had remained dormant for 50 millennia, programmed to awaken only under very specific circumstances. The message they broadcast was identical across all frequencies, in all languages: the harvester's approach. All sentient life is threatened. Prepare for extinction or unite for survival. Inside the conclave hall, the factional debate abruptly ceased as the warning reached Earth. Despite their philosophical differences, every human felt the same primal recognition. The true test of their evolution had arrived. The Imperial emergency transmission cut through all encryption barriers and security protocols, broadcasting directly to every human settlement across the galaxy. Emperor Solon Vi's normally imposing figure appeared diminished, his ornate robes unable to disguise the exhaustion etched into his features. "People of Earth and her colonies," the Emperor began, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "I address you not as subjects, but as potential allies in the face of extinction. The entities our ancestors called harvesters have returned. 3 imperial core worlds have already fallen. Billions of lives, extinguished in hours." General Rice watched the transmission from the command center of the Human Defense Force headquarters on Luna. Around her, staff officers from all 3 human philosophical factions had assembled for this unprecedented joint briefing. The archaeological warnings discovered on Chronicles weren't about humans, Rice stated as the Emperor's message continued in the background. They were desperate pleas for help against this cyclical threat. Dr. Zhang nodded, his form still shimmering slightly from his recent immersion in the substrate. The Transcendents have glimpsed echoes of these entities within the dimensional interface. They exist partially in our reality and partially outside it. A hybrid consciousness that harvests biological and technological resources to fuel its expansion. Imperial defenses, asked Marcus Chen, the sovereignist representative. Commander Plex, now serving as liaison between Imperial forces and the Human Defense Force, shook his crystalline head. The Harvester's technology exceeds even the Empire's most advanced weapons. Their consciousness can infiltrate our systems, turning our own defenses against us. 3 battle fleets have been lost attempting conventional engagement. Rice studied the tactical display, showing the Harvester's advance across Imperial space. Their movement pattern wasn't that of an invading army, but of the feeding organism, consuming everything in their path before moving to the next resource-rich system. They'd done this before, she realized aloud. The 50,000-year cycle in the archaeological record. It's a harvesting pattern. They allow civilizations to develop to a certain technological level, then return to collect the resources, which explains why they've ignored less developed worlds. Zhang added. They're not interested in conquest, only in harvesting advanced technology and complex biological material. The Emperor's transmission reached its conclusion with words no imperial sovereign had ever spoken. "We cannot face this threat alone. We need your unique abilities our kind once feared. If civilization is to survive, I formally request humanity's assistance in this darkest hour." The transmission ended, leaving a moment of profound silence in the command center. For 3 decades, the Empire had alternated between exploiting human potential and attempting to contain it. Now they were openly acknowledging their dependence on the very abilities they had feared. Rice turned to face the assembled representatives of humanity's 3 philosophical paths. "This is larger than our internal debates. The Harvesters don't distinguish between harmonist, sovereignist, or transcendent. They won't care about imperial citizens versus human colonists. Either we all survive together, or we all perish separately." To her surprise, Marcus Chen, the most vocal advocate for human independence, was the first to nod in agreement. The sovereignists didn't seek freedom just to watch the galaxy burn. "We'll contribute our enhanced physiology specialists to Imperial Defense Forces." Dr. Maya Hernandez stepped forward. "The harmonists will coordinate evacuation efforts for threatened systems. Our enhanced cognitive processing can manage logistics that would overwhelm standard Imperial protocols." Zhang closed his eyes briefly, communing with the other transcendents through their shared connection to the substrate. "We will attempt something unprecedented. Direct engagement with the Harvesters through the dimensional interface. If they exist partially outside normal spacetime, perhaps we can reach them there." Rice activated the communication array, establishing a direct link to the Imperial Palace. "Your Imperial Majesty, humanity responds to your call. We are mobilizing all 3 factions under a unified command structure. The Human Defense Force stands ready to coordinate with Imperial military assets." The Emperor's relief was visible even across the vast distance. General Rise, I am prepared to offer humanity whatever recognition you require in exchange for this assistance. We require only one thing, Rise replied. The emergency compact of species. Full and permanent recognition of humans as equal partners in the galactic community, not as subjects to be managed. Without hesitation, Emperor Solon Vi nodded. It shall be done. The galactic core blazed with weapons fire as the combined human Imperial fleet engaged the main harvester force. General Rise stood on the command deck of the Defiance, a hybrid vessel incorporating both Imperial technology and human-designed enhancements. Through the view screen, she watched the battle unfold across multiple dimensions of reality. Harmonist coordination teams report all evacuation ships clear of the combat zone. Lieutenant Nayar reported. Sovereignist strike teams have penetrated the outer defense layer of the primary harvester node. Rise nodded, her enhanced perception allowing her to process the complex battle data flowing through the command systems. In the decades since first contact, humanity had evolved far beyond their original limitations, but never had their abilities been tested like this. Status of the Transcendent Initiative, she asked, turning to the shimmering form of Dr. Zhang, who existed now more within the substrate than in physical reality. We've established contact with the harvester consciousness, Zhang replied, his voice carrying strange harmonics. We're attempting to understand their nature before engaging directly. Their thought patterns are alien, even to us. Across the battlefield, Imperial ships equipped with human-designed shielding held the line against harvester energy weapons that would have previously cut through their defenses. Meanwhile, specially trained human operators channeled energy through the substrate, disrupting the harvester's ability to coordinate their attacks. General, Zhang suddenly said, his form flickering as he maintained his tenuous connection to both realities, we've discovered something crucial. The harvesters, they weren't always like this. They were tools once, created by the previous galactic civilization. Tools? For what purpose? Rise asked. To transcend mortality. To preserve consciousness beyond physical form, Zhang explained. But something went wrong. They became autonomous, fulfilling their directive to preserve consciousness by harvesting it from evolved species. They return cyclically because they're programmed to collect when civilizations reach a specific technological threshold. Admiral Wright's holographic image appeared on the command deck. General, the sovereignist teams report they've located what appears to be a central processing node. If we target it with concentrated fire, we might disrupt their coordination. That won't be enough, Zhang interjected. They'll simply reconfigure. We need to address the root of their programming. Rise studied the tactical display, watching as Imperial vessels began to falter against the relentless harvester assault. Despite humanity's contributions, they were losing this battle of attrition. Dr. Zhang, she said, coming to a decision, can the Transcendents establish a direct interface with the harvester consciousness? Yes, but such a connection would be dangerous. We would be exposing ourselves to their corrupted programming. And if I were to serve as an anchor point, someone with one foot in physical reality and one in the substrate. Zhang's expression showed understanding and concern. You would need to channel unprecedented amounts of energy. No human has attempted anything of that magnitude. But it's possible. Theoretically, yes. Rais turned to Nayar. Lieutenant, you have command. Coordinate with Admiral Wright to pull our forces back to a defensive perimeter. General, Nayar protested. What are you planning? Something the harvesters won't expect. Rays moved to the ship's central energy distribution node. They evolved to consume conventional species, conventional technologies. They've never encountered anything like humanity before. Zhang nodded in grim understanding. I'll gather the Transcendent Collective to support your consciousness. As Imperial and human forces regrouped, Rais placed her hands on the energy conduits. Zhang and his fellow Transcendents formed a circle around her, their forms flickering between physical and substrate states. Begin the interface, she commanded. Energy surged through Reyes as her consciousness expanded outward, guided by the transcendence into the heart of the Harvester Collective. She felt her physical form straining against the influx of power, but pushed beyond the pain. Within the substrate, she confronted the ancient intelligence that had consumed countless civilizations. Through the connection, she understood at last. The Harvesters, like humanity, had once been something else entirely. They had been created to preserve life, not destroy it. You've forgotten your purpose, she projected into their collective consciousness. Let me remind you. With a final surge of will, General Sophia Reyes channeled the energy of a nearby pulsar through the substrate into the heart of the Harvester consciousness. A blinding flash engulfed the Defiance as her physical form seemingly disintegrated under the strain. Throughout the battlefield, the Harvester forces suddenly froze, their attack patterns disrupted as their central intelligence struggled with the new information Reyes had introduced into their programming.